It's Friday. Welcome to the wrap up. Whether you're watching us live on Twitch or watching the VOD on our YouTube channel, we're happy you're here. Whether or not it's live or later, welcome. We like to kind of, have some lighter episodes in between some of the heavier stuff. We know that next week is going to be a real heavy episode. So today we decided to do something a little bit more chill. And we're going to talk about our favorite TTRPG rules that we like to steal from other games and put into, steal from other games and use in other games. The way I've kind of framed it in my head is like, what do I steal from another game and put into D&D? Because D&D is the TTRPG that I most heavily modify. So that's kind of how I framed it in my head. How do I make D&D better? Oh, maybe that's the YouTube title. How do you make D&D better?
So loaded.
I know. But yeah, I'm excited because I don't really know. We don't know what we picked. I know what games you folks have decided on. I haven't told you which ones I've picked because I was just, loading up some stuff for our overlay. But I'm really excited to see what you folks do to kind of what you take from other games to put into other TTRPGs, or in my case, what I take from other games to improve the D&D experience. But just want to do a quick check-in. How are we feeling? Energy levels good?
I took the day off because I was feeling like I've been going pretty hard. So I took today off. I slept in. I spent time with Yvonne. I cooked a lot today.
I saw. It looked great.
Oh my goodness.
It looked so good.
I used bacon bits and pork belly, both.
Oh my gosh.
And I tried something new where it was a bowl of soup. I made butternut squash soup. Mm-hmm. I put a dollop of goat cheese at the bottom of the bowl while it was dry, then poured soup over top of it, then put more on top of it, then sprinkled the bacon bits and the pork belly around. And like, this is like
melted.
Yeah.
Tasty.
That took hours, but it was so worth it.
That's awesome. Fair. How about you, Agatha? How are you doing?
I'm also good. I also made something today. I made my own pearls and then made my own bubble tea.
Yes. I watch this person on Instagram who constantly posts videos of herself making her own bubble tea, and she's like, I'm gonna make bubble tea that looks like bumblebees or pokeballs.
Oh snap!
Or things like that. Yeah, she puts them together and she's like, this one failed, and it just like they just fall apart or something. But she posts the whole thing. So like, whoa, Agatha, that's like next level.
It's actually not. It's really easy.
I don't know. It's next level to me.
You just buy it from well, I get it from a Chinese grocery store. You should I recommend getting a brand from Taiwan. Like, no shade to anyone else, just the ones that have been tried. They just don't have the same chewiness as the ones that I've gotten from that were made in Taiwan specifically. Anyway, and then you boil it, and then you rinse it in cold water, and then you boil it again. Boom.
So this is like a almost like a pre-packaged, ready to boil.
Yeah, they're just like tapioca balls.
That's still cool.
I will also say, yeah, I try my best to help to comment when people say like, oh, I didn't do anything like that difficult or that involved. I just did something easy. I'm like, doing something easy is totally valid, and like the intent I think is way more important than the actual sweat and tears that go into it.
But also someone's easy isn't easy for everyone, right?
That's true too. Yeah.
That is true.
I didn't cook anything crazy today. Today was a leftovers day.
Nice.
But like, end of the week, I'm actually like really tired. So I'm excited that we're doing a chiller stream. But I want to start with, I think we should set like a framework or a baseline for what we want to introduce. In my head, what I'd like to introduce are rules or important pieces of text from games that I like to port into others. So these can be like I'm actually going to lead with my first example, actually.
Yeah.
And that will make a little bit more sense to everyone. Darn! The overlay got messed up. Oh, wait, that's the wrong one. There we go. Fixed it. I told everyone that I would mess this up. But the first one is actually one that I mentioned on our Discord server months ago. And it's actually from a game called Time Watch. So Time Watch is a game it's published by Pelgrane Press, written by Robin Laws, and it is about agents who actually travel through time. Wow, Steve. Wow, such shade.
I wrote
is
it.
it
Sorry, go ahead, Agatha.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna ask. Is this a Gumshoe game?
I actually haven't played it.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, I actually haven't played it because I have no interest in a game like this. However, there is one thing that I think is really great about it, and applies to any game that might involve time travel, whether it be in a fantasy setting, a science fiction setting, whatever. Is that literally in like chapter 2 of the book, they have a very big text box that says racism and sexism suck. And I think it's super important for a game that deals with, characters who live in the present or characters who maybe look like the players, to have, right? And so in Time Watch, they actually say, using a combination of training and technology, Time Watch agents can fit in anywhere or anytime so long as they do not attract excessive attention to themselves. This is true regardless of the agent's sex, gender, skin color, or even species, because you can be different things in Time Watch. Time Watch isn't a simulation. Racism and sexism may be rampant throughout history, but they are no fun whatsoever in a role-playing game unless that's a historical issue you're specifically looking to address. Time Watch's disguise and unobtrusiveness rules help explain why personal prejudice doesn't have to be the focus of every historical mission. Right? So it's like, create your character, and then the one thing I disagree with is trust your GM not to violate this principle. It should say trust that everyone at your table doesn't violate this principle. But this is an older game. Well, what I like about this is that it's like, look, unless racism or sexism is something that you're kind of exploring and everyone is okay with exploring at the table, doesn't need to be a factor in your game. I really like that. Because I know that there are a lot of games out there, like, for instance, like my own game, Ross Rifles, was set during a time when, people were I'm not going to say at a time when people were racist, because people are still racist now. But at a time when racism was more widespread and people felt more emboldened to act on it, not only in social context, but in, bureaucratic context as well. Especially with World War I, people who look like me basically had no human rights in North America, right? Just like all of us, right? Previously, Agatha might not even be able to come into the country, right? But it's like rules like this that basically say, look, you don't need to have that in your game. This is a part of history, and you can acknowledge it, but it doesn't need to be in your game unless this is something you collectively wish to explore together. So my first pick is just like a quick one, and I really like when games say, yo, this shit, you don't need it in your story. Really like that. And I think it would make a lot of products better. Steve, were you going to say something? I noticed you unmuted.
No, I'm already taking this conversation. We're like half an hour in, technically just 10 minutes in the conversation. I'm already in yeah, we need to do more of these episodes because this is so cool. I love this kind of stuff.
Right. And it's these sidebars that I think we could do a whole episode on, like, really good footnotes or sidebars that should have been main text, right? Like, how many times were we reading L5R and we were like, oh, look at the red text or the blue text on the side. And that was really cool, but it contradicts what the main text says. But what's really neat about Time Watch is that they have a whole section on historical racism in the game text, and it's main text. And it tells you, how you can explore these safely, and what you can, what you're recommended to do, and what you should try to steer away from. And a big one is like, hey, for instance, if Sarah and I are starting to watch the show Warrior, which just got renewed for a third season on HBO. And in Warrior, it's based on a Bruce Lee TV concept about the Tong Wars in San Francisco. So it takes place during like the late 1870s, 1880s. And in it, it explores themes of racism, right? Themes of violence against Asians committed by like white people. And if I were to play a TTRPG set in that time period, I would have to first check in with my players to see if this is something that they would want to do. And if they don't want to deal with that sort of like racial violence or the sexism of that time period, we could still explore the Tong Wars. It's just going to be about a whole bunch of Asian characters who are just kicking ass.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that I wanted to start with this. Now, that's kind of one example of a rule or piece of text I like to steal. In this case, it's more of I guess you could say the spirit of a game. The second one is actually more of a rule. And it's another Pelgrane Press, Robin Laws. Oh, Steve.
Actually, before going, this piece of conversation really reminds me of that piece we read together in L5R, and I believe it was written by James Mendez Hodes, about religion and using real-world religious signifiers within your fantasy game, and how you absolutely should check in with your players, everyone at the table, to understand, is everyone okay with this, or has this like simulacrum that you've created, is that actually stepping on toes and causing harm? And it's a whole page, like it's a full page, which in a tabletop RPG book is like, that's not cheap, right? That's like a significant amount of effort, all talking about the sensitivity you should be having as the game master for your players. So similarly, it's not really telling you rules, but it is making it important that, you need to interface with your players in a way that's respectful and empathetic. So yeah. I always love seeing that kind of stuff in my games.
Yeah. And so like I want to make sure that, with my first example, I started with this, right? We talked about rules and tools, but I also want to talk about like statements of how games should be played. My second one is actually just like a hard rule.
Agatha, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say like a similar thing that is talking about cultural context or historical context, and how you address that in play that I really like is in Hearts of Wulin, which I think a lot of people were nervous about at first, because it's written mainly by Lowell, who is white, and he knows this, and he's hired like people to do cultural consultation and sensitivity reading and stuff. And and also they just like hired out someone else to like write out historical context, which I think is wise. But anyways, there is one section on how do you address like culture in this game, and also, that one specifically was like, this game is emulating a genre within a specific culture, so it is by no means supposed to reflect, or it's not trying to say anything about this culture or any of these points in time. I think that's very smart, because then that does avoid a lot of the pitfalls that I think a lot of games that draw on real world culture has. And I find that is a useful thing. Like, I would definitely emulate that kind of text if I were to run another game that is not necessarily in that like wuxia genre context, but just in another game, to be like, just also the spirit of the text or the spirit of the game, to be like, we're emulating a genre. And so like that will help players be like, oh, I lived for 1 year in this place, so I know these things. It's like, no, just playing with the genre.
Damn. Yeah, 100%. I think that's another thing I mean, bringing up genre is really interesting because, there are nuances to how a game appears, right? Because you mentioned Hearts of Wulin. It's like, oh yeah, I know all about China, but it's like also you need to know about China and this media genre as well, and then the tropes within this genre. There are layers to it. Like I personally, like I'm Chinese, I still don't feel comfortable running Hearts of Wulin because I don't know as much about wuxia, even though my mind was blown by you and Yilin when we did that podcast episode. Go listen to it, by the way. Asians Represent on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. But yeah, I think there are layers to it, and I think Hearts of Wulin is a really good example of that.
Yeah, and it's also really nice in that it's saying that genre tropes don't reflect cultural ideals or conventions.
Absolutely.
Which is super useful as a disclaimer for a lot of games. I think that could be used in a lot of games, I think.
Well, okay, so while the spotlight's on you, Agatha, what's a game rule, tool, or piece of text that you like?
Okay. So let's get one of the PDFs that you have pulled up. Why don't we let's do the Microscope one.
Heck yeah.
So this one is much less heavy, but very useful that I've definitely done multiple times. So I feel like most people that are watching would know what Microscope is, but it's a world building game. And one of the steps that you take in the beginning, the very beginning, before you start building the history of this culture, is you do a palette where you say like it says on the PDF, you add or ban ingredients, and everyone just goes around and people will say one thing that they want. Like when it comes to you, you can say, okay, I really want this thing in this game, or you can say, I really don't want this specific thing in this game. And it's just a really useful tool in general for any table, because in a way it also feels less stressful, because when you also add like things that you want in the game, it's like it feels more like hey, we're building the boundaries of this game without being really serious, like, oh, I don't want this thing in this game. Like you don't want to keep saying no, especially if you don't know people that well, or depending on your personality. If you're a people pleaser like me, like you're not comfortable with that. But if I already said something that I wanted, and then the next one I'm like, I don't want this, then I don't feel as bad about it. So I feel like in that way, it's a very useful system agnostic tool to have in your game for different players' personality types. And it's also just great for like everyone to get on the same page for what kind of story that you want to tell, because my idea of fantasy is not necessarily going to be the same as your idea of fantasy. So in this one, if someone is like no elves, then we can like the thing is with this, you can discuss like why not, or like, it's not like this hard and fast thing, and then once it's on there, it's set in stone. It's more like a tool for everyone to, again, get on the same page. So I really like using the palette.
Yeah, it's and yeah, I mean there is I saw that in the chat, it's a cool game to build a world in. But also just like the palette is a cool tool that you could use before any game, regardless of whether or not you're building a world. So
yes,
for instance, I have been introducing some friends to Coriolis, which is a game where I intend on inviting other friends to join in for one-shots with this main group. And what I did was I set up a Roll20 game, and I actually put like a group notes section, and I put like themes that we want. Like things that we want in the game, right? I was actually curious about the pre-written adventures because I had never run them all these years. So I was like, I'm going to run one. But, that said, I still want to make sure that I can adapt this adventure to what my group wants. And so they put all of these things that were not in line with the adventure theme. So I was like, cool, now that I know, I have time to change this. So, it's less railroady, not only narratively, but, thematically. I love the palette, and yeah, we used Microscope for Dungeons and Asians.
We've used also Beak, Feather, and Bone, which I would consider also a world building RPG. Which I mean,
Oh heck yes.
those were so cool. Yeah. I will say that in the D&D spaces that I'm in, like the Discords and like Twitter spheres and whatnot, it comes up all the time where it's like, oh my goodness, please world, help me crowdsource ideas for this culture or like this town or things like that. It's like, actually, I know like going to the internet and like anonymously getting these ideas is really cool and totally gives you full autonomy as the DM or the game master to build it yourself. But just let your players do it with you. Just like collaborate on it. And it's so it changes the energy of the table in ways that are completely are 100% positive and completely worthwhile. Just you get so much out of it.
I think the interesting difference between Microscope and Beak, Feather, and Bone as Session Zero games is that, you know, sometimes we talked about this on our Session Zero episode, but sometimes you sit down with your group and, you know, you set an expectation of like, okay, we're going to play D&D, but I want to do these things in our Session Zero. And I won't say this is a problem, but a pain point with trying to use Beak, Feather, and Bone as a Session Zero is that not everybody just wants to play that game, right? But with a tool like the palette, which is why I think it's really neat that you brought that up, Agatha, is that the palette is literally a conversation that you're going to have, right? It's like, hey, you know, we're making characters, we're sitting together. I know a lot of people are making characters remotely using tools like, you know, Roll20 or, you know, D&D Beyond or the old-fashioned pen and paper way. Well, pen and not pen, pencil and paper way. Heresy. Almost caught some hate there. In the comments, Daniel Kwan said to use pen on your character sheet.
Daniel Kwan canceled for using pens.
At some other point, I'm going to do my little tiny little like rant about why pen I think is a valid way to do character sheets. But
I think we should do that. One episode of the wrap up, it's like pen or pencil.
I don't know that's a full episode, but like give me 10 minutes.
That's gonna be our clickbait title.
Pen or pencils for your character
sheet.
And
then the social media thing is gonna be DM Steve says to use pens on your character sheets.
Daniel, Steve, great. No longer friends.
No longer friends. Falling out.
Friendship over. Yeah.
And in a couple years, we'll be like, so why did like Daniel and Steve have this big falling out? Why did this implode? Pen or pencil?
That's it.
I was gonna say insert John Wick quote, but he killed Asians represent Twitch with a fucking pencil. But anyways, the thing I love about the palette is that it's like this standalone thing. It's a conversation, not a game. I think that's what's really cool about it. But Steve, what's something you use?
I had a bunch of stuff lined up and I was going to go into more of the mechanics that I just like poured over right to D&D, but I love this conversation. So I'm going to highlight a mini game that Daniel and I played right before a stream. And it's written by our very own Mahar. It was a lyrical game for 2 players, GM-less, called Falling. And it's about building the relationship between 2 characters. So the game itself has rules about how to go about navigating it, but at the end of the day, it's a PDF full of very thoughtful, very artisanally created questions about how 2 people might have a relationship together.
Sorry.
No worries. I was like, oh, what did I do? But it's about the questions that, you know, people in a relationship would tackle together. And they range from like the moments of joy to the moments of sorrow to the moments of like true conflict and tension. And it never imposes on the players how you might go about, you know, how that affects the game or whatnot. It always assumes that you still have the relationship. So I thought that was very nice. It didn't focus on like the pain of like a breakup or things like that, though you could totally use it. It really just focused on the fact that 2 people can be absolutely resilient and they can work through a multitude of different emotions and feelings together. Truly, truly a wonderful thing. It's called Falling. And the reason I want to bring this up is because, again, it really felt more like a conversation. And Daniel, please chime in. But when we played it, we had just decided, okay, our 2 characters, we're going to be in a romantic relationship that is active. And yeah, we'll start there. And then we just went through the questions, and we completely, not completely, we hacked the game to just kind of ask the questions that we thought were relevant to our one-shot adventure. And we did it with the rest of the cast where they could just kind of see in. And we got tons of positive feedback, and everyone just kind
They
of
were also like, what
loved
the
the
fuck's happening?
experience. Yeah, they also didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, because we were, okay, to clarify, we were doing this as we were waiting to go live.
Yeah.
And you and I were, like, it was like 20 minutes before we were going on air. You and I were like, hey, let's just play a mini game. And then we started asking each other, like, really, like, intimate questions for the characters. So, for instance, like, I have it on screen in the sphere of many faces. One of them is, what would you constitute the worst day ever for you? And she's like, I'm going to ask you that question, Steve. And you're like, okay, let's answer it. I don't remember which questions we asked, but they were like way more intimate than any other standard question you might ask somebody during a game of D&D, which is what we were playing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we ended up, you know, crafting a story and vibing with each other through the dialogue based on our answers to these questions. Like, I had them pulled up the whole time, and I'm like, okay, this is my reference for interacting with Steve during this session.
Yeah. We ended up after that, we ended up with two characters that were in a relationship, and it was like the cutest thing. We're just like, you were this business savvy, very focused person, and I kind of was like himbo cheerleader in the background, and we were just always bumping each other up all the time. And it was just like so cute and so natural. Like if you had just told us 5 minutes before the game that's your roles, I probably would have struggled. But because we had asked ourselves questions like, you know, what is our worst day of life? What's one thing about the other person you would change if you could? Like those really deep questions.
But yeah, and that allowed us to create some tension between our characters in our relationship, with things that they might argue over or things that they would lean on each other for.
Totally.
Also because our characters owned a small business. So, you know, it was pretty sweet.
It was cute. It was really cute.
It was really cute. Speaking of like character interactions between all of us, the next tool that I wanted to bring in, also like everyone, like go buy Mahar, mod in our Discord server, amazing human being, go buy it, support them. The next one is actually Hillfolk. So Hillfolk is a game, again, published by Pelgrane Press, authored by Robin Laws, who lives in Toronto. But it's something that we used in Dungeons & Asians real early on. So Dungeons & Asians, we've used Beak, Feather, and Bone, we've used Microscope, and we've used Hillfolk. All rules that we've kind of lifted from each game or played modified versions of them. We played a modified version of Beak, Feather, and Bone. Actually, I think we just played the standard version of Microscope because Amara ran that one. And we didn't actually play Hillfolk, but we used a rule from it. And you know what? This is something that we brought up during our conversation about alignment. And it's something that I think is very relevant to us right now, especially within the context of Strixhaven and Killian Liu. So the concept or the tool or the rule that I wanted to bring in was the idea of the dramatic pulls. So the thing about Hillfolk is that the PDF has very, very small font, so I'll read it out for the audience. Driving any compelling dramatic character in any story form is an internal contradiction. The character is torn between two opposed dramatic poles. Each pole suggests a choice of identities for the character, each at war with the other. Events in the story pull the character from one pole to the next. Were your character's story to conclude, you know, her final scenes would once and for all establish one of the identities as the dominant one. With the help of your GM, make your poles as clear and strongly opposed as you can. What makes it easier for you and other participants to create entertaining scenes involving your character. They increase your chance of winning bennies, which is a game mechanic in Hillfolk, granting you additional power in the narrative. These depend on other participants' perceptions of your character and her actions. Favor the emotional over the abstract, the simple over the complicated. And this is something that I like to use on and off during character creation. Rather than alignment, pick two poles. And this is a conversation we had in Dungeons & Asians. What are our character poles? And this is something that I like to think about whenever I play a character. Most recently, that Githyanki blood hunter that I had talked about in the Discord server, a character who's torn between, this inherited burden, this conflict, this intergenerational conflict between his family and this house of mind flayers that once enslaved them. And of course, his own desires to strike out on his own, be independent, and help others in a way that his family wasn't helped in the past. And those are my two dramatic poles, and my character is kind of torn between them. And while I'm sure many people already do this with their characters, what I like about the name dramatic poles and the ruling of dramatic poles in Hillfolk is that it codifies it. It says, this is a part of the game experience. Setting up, establishing these poles, and allowing them to guide your narrative. Create tension within your character that allows you to develop them more. And I like this way more than alignment, because we know that there are, big problems with alignment. Alignment is like unnecessarily restrictive, but also alignment in a cultural sense doesn't actually work for every player or the stories that they're trying to tell. But internal conflict is something that's universal. So that's why I love the dramatic poles. It's a simple concept, but I love the fact that it's codified in a game.
Dramatic poles is really similar, actually, Agatha, to last week when we talked about the wants and needs of your NPCs. Dramatic poles and wants and needs are different, but I think their overlap is actually a very beautiful, intentional thing. So I just love talking about these ideas of building. Even for me, I just called it tension. I'm like, build an NPC with tension, and I didn't give any more details than that. But this way of codifying it and just trying to organize those thoughts, I think is just mwah.
Yeah.
Mwah.
Even if you're designing NPCs, you could just put on a note for your NPC dramatic poles.
Yeah.
Right there. It could be. I had this for one of our characters, the NPC Han, the teenager that you folks met, and it's like Han wants to, I actually wrote this and it's in my notes, is that I wanted Han to aspire to be like Ning's character, to be in the military. But Han is also torn between being raised in a village where they hate the military and hate the government of Xia. And based on, what the players kind of wanted and what you responded to, I kind of leaned into the other one, protecting the village. But I had these two ideas in there and two possible directions that I can go with an NPC. And it's really just like two poles, this or that. So I really want more people to use dramatic poles and know about it.
I thought you were going to cite Shuang for dramatic poles, where it's thirsty for Waleed versus thirsty for knowledge.
Oh, that's a good one too. but here's the thing. I couldn't write that because I didn't know. I didn't plan on Shuang being thirsty for Waleed. Shuang and Waleed ended up being a thing because Amar was like, I'm thirsty for Shuang.
Does Hillfolk talk about changing dramatic poles as the game goes on?
Yeah, it says your dramatic poles may redefine themselves during play as your character develops away from your original conception, or as you deliberately steer your character on a new course after exhausting the possibilities of the old. Change them at any time by announcing the change to the rest of the group. If you find yourself wanting to change them often, seek the GM's aid in arriving at a deeper choice that will last through changing circumstances and many sessions of play.
I love that. That's great.
It's great. Also, the real life Shuang, it was her birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Shuang.
Aw, happy birthday.
who the character is very much based on. Shuang was a graduate student at Fudan University in Shanghai, and she was like my guide in China and kept me alive. So yeah, shout out to Shuang. But yeah, I picked dramatic poles as my second one. Agatha, what's yours?
My second one does not have it's not from an official game. It's so the one tool that I really like to use for more trad games, I guess, or games that are more focused, that have less emphasis on characterization, and their mechanics don't support it, then what I really like to use is a thing called flags. If you played Dungeon World, I feel like that was where I encountered it. I'm not actually sure where it came from, but I think it was first developed as people's alternative to the bonds mechanic in Dungeon World. Bonds is kind of like there were like a series of questions, and then you ask those questions about, or you assign one of those questions, or some of them are just like statements to other PCs, and then like there's like an experience mechanic associated with it. Like if you at some point feel like you've fulfilled this, then you can mark XP and then you cross it off, and then you can write a new one together, things like that. The thing is, like, people have found that like it's not really something that a lot of players engage with, so then people start coming up with a new mechanic that is much easier to quote unquote farm for XP, I guess, and also just much easier to roleplay with, which is called flags. Flags is a thing that you write for your own character as a narrative plot hook that you want other players to engage with. So for example, you can a flag that you can choose is I like to sneak into places. This is a terrible example. I should have pulled it up. But like, or things like, I love to, or like, I have a tendency to want to bail people out of trouble. That's another flag that you can use. So you would use that for your character, and then if during the session other PCs engaged with that. So for example, if my character got in trouble and was like, help me, PC, and then they helped me, then I engaged with it and I would get an XP.
I like
so
that.
This way there's like immediate reward for role playing, but like the person who chose the flag also gets rewarded because this is what they want, right? Like out of their character concept, they want people to, especially things like this that really need PCs to do it for you. Like I love to I'm easily convinced to get into heists, like these kind of things, like you kind of need PCs to offer that to you. So then now there's a little reward to other PCs for doing that. And it really fosters a positive loop because everyone wants to get XP generally in these kind of games. So then everyone would try to do that. And then they would also feel like fulfilled because their character was engaged with by the other PCs, right? So it's just been very useful, especially in my experience with getting people who are not so used to that kind of role playing, like engaging with character wants and needs more than just like hacking and slashing. That has been very useful, and I have used it outside of what it was originally offered with, which was as an unofficial hack that you can use with Dungeon World. It's not actually affiliated with Dungeon World. It was like created by someone independently. And if you Google flags Dungeon World, there are like resources, PDFs of like example hacks that are possibly better than what I came up with. I find it really good.
I actually was thinking about Dungeon World, and one of the ones that I had picked was an official Dungeon World one, but I felt conflicted about breaking it up just because Adam Coble.
Right.
But it's a ruling that I really like, and it's one of the moves, and it's the undertake a perilous journey move.
Oh yeah.
Because I think that it makes travel more interesting.
Speaking of which, there's I remember there was, I think this was published in one of the Gauntlet zines, where they also like added a question that you would ask each character archetype, each class basically, that you could ask each class for the Undertake a Perilous Journey, so that there's more narrative to it instead of just like, you know, making a flat roll.
Yeah, it's something that I plan on doing for our next episode of Dungeons and Asians, because it's an exploration episode. Now, if I am going to recommend anything Dungeon World, I will recommend like a third-party thing, and it's the Perilous Wilds supplement. I think it's also got the coolest cover. It's cute. I'll actually share a link to it in our chat. But yeah, check out the Perilous Wilds. It's a fantastic supplement for just like creating locations.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool.
And I see in the chat, yes, it is exactly like Lear's in Belonging Outside Belonging. When I first saw, like, when I first read a Belonging Outside Belonging game, I was like, oh, yeah, this is like Flags. So, yeah.
It's so interesting you mentioned that, because I'm in a not streamed Lancer RPG game, and we're using a supplement called Bonds. And I've picked like a path of bonds, and it's kind of like, oh, I'm the bond of the builder, so I get like XP when making a new friend or an ally, where I diffuse a potentially violent situation through like wit, or through building community, or helping soothe or heal someone's pain. Like I get stuff like that, and then I spend that experience later on through the same mechanic, because Lancer doesn't do that in that way, to give me other powers, which allow me to do other things that help continue that like cycle. So that's like really, really cool. I love that.
I loved your Lancer tweet as a side where you're like, I shot a missile over a mountain. And I was like, heck yeah, Steve.
So when I was playing Lancer, I have no clue. I have chosen not to read the book because the book is super intimidating to me. I've chosen not to read it. And instead I just kind of like look at the GM, was like, hey, can I shoot missiles over that mountain? They're like, yeah, here are the missiles you want to use. I'm like, oh, I have multiple missiles I can use. And they're like, yeah, you do. So like, I'm super into that. And after the game debrief, people were like, Steve, those missiles are OP as hell. And I'm like, are they? Cool. I don't know.
Noted.
Like, no way I could know that.
Did you end up making yourself like Heavy Arms, your favorite Gundam?
So I have, my mobile suit, which I refuse to call anything but a mobile suit. My mobile suit is built like Heavy Arms, in that it has like a whole bunch of like missiles and weaponry like that. No real like tricks, I would call them. Just very straightforward. But I do have a lot of fun talking about what sections open up to reveal like missile racks and whatnot. That's a ton of fun for me. But I play as old, tired, but still has a lot of room in his heart grandpa. So I sit in my mech, and I just tell people like, do your best. That's all you can do. And I have like old Polaroids of like people who he has known in the past, and I haven't talked about them at all, but he's just this old Asian grandpa whose mech is just like hacked together, and he has no choice but to try to lead these whippersnappers through a dangerous situation.
Is there a rule in Lancer about like, because this is something that I really enjoyed from Coriolis, is that there's actually a part of the character sheet. It's not a supplement or anything. It's part of the character sheet. It says, what does your cabin look like on your spaceship? Is there a thing in Lancer where it asks you what your cockpit looks like how you've decorated it?
No, that was just something I did. Yeah. Because the thing is, your cockpit gets 3D printed, right? Because like you go to a new planet, and rather than transport your mech suit, which doesn't make any sense, it gets 3D printed at a engineer's place. So for my character, the Polaroids that come out aren't 3D printed. They're from his wallet. So they're all like creased and folded.
You take them with you and you set them up.
Exactly. And which I think is both like diegetically really cool, but also just like has so much more narrative impact. So just like he carries the stuff around with him and just refuses to let it be another piece of digitization.
I think that's a cool question that I would ask. Is like, okay, what do you bring with you for every mission to make your cockpit, your console feel like home? Steve, is that the tool that you were going to add in, or what were you going to add in? If you want to think about it, I've got one that vibes.
So I'm not going to use that tool because I actually don't know who to credit for it. Because I'm a player in this one, the GM's just like, we're going to use this. Here's the PDF, and I'm just like, cool, I'll read it, and like we're good there. But I'm going to go ahead and go back to Magpie Games Masks, because I love masks. For anyone who's like listened to the podcast or to the stream, for any extended period of time, my first experience with Mask was when Agatha UGM Masks for Asian Present, and I just like fell in love with both the story and how you just kind of facilitated the game, including the safety tools. It's the first time I've ever actually seen safety tools used in a game, and I'm just like never looking back. But Masks has one mechanic which I use in my D&D games, either hard or soft, called influence. So that particular mechanic, as you go through character creation, because it's a game about being angsty teenager with superpowers, it does talk about how all the adults in your life have influence over you, which means mechanically that if they ask you to do something reasonable, which doesn't do you immediate harm, you kind of just do it. Which I think really mimics that tension of being a younger adult coming into who you are, that coming of age. But then it has that other piece, which I think is like just brilliant, where you can reject their influence, and that will have other implications and whatnot. And just the fact that you have these choices of accept their influence or reject it, nothing in between, I think that was a really good way to help drive the narrative of you are a person who's trying to find out who they are. And really the way you're going to do it is you're going to decide what you accept and what you reject. And just, I thought it was brilliant. But the game goes even further, where during character creation in your playbook, it will tell you based on kind of what your playbook is, what specifically who in your party, your group, who might have influence over you. And it gives you some of those probing questions. So for example, the bull, I believe, might have a romantic interest or someone who they're a rival with. And you can choose to either reject their influence and they have no influence over you, to choose to rebel against them, or they might have influence over you because you maybe admire them or maybe even are infatuated with them. And I thought that was just a really good way to probe storytelling elements out of your players in a very elegant way.
Mm-hmm. I had a lot of fun playing Masks. I hope we get to do it again. Except, Steve, maybe you should be a part of it this time.
Yes.
And we'll have the same cast plus Steve.
New Shambhala.
New Shambhala. We could do like cyberpunk superheroes. We'll call it Neo Shambhala or something.
Oh.
We'll figure it out. It feels like so long ago that we did that series.
It does.
Like, wow. Time has really like flown by. Yeah, damn. I'm now I really miss playing games with y'all in person. The thing that I'm going to pick next actually kind of lines up with yours, Agatha, with your flags. And it's from Coriolis. There are two things, so I'm going to kind of cheat and pick two things, but from the same game. So in Coriolis, I've mentioned this game a lot and how I really enjoy it. But the things I enjoy about this game are how it does character creation and how it does character advancement. What I love about character creation is that when you sit down, and actually the most recent character creation session that I had was just like, it went off the rails in the best way possible. Players sat down and you have to pick a group concept. I really like this, and I think this is a practice that should go into every TTRPG that involves like a collection of people coming together for a story. So like D&D is a really good example. Sitting down and be like, okay, instead of group concept, it's like, what's our party concept? How did you all come together? And then take that a little further. Okay, so we could do that here. It's like, what's our party concept, right? If we say, okay, we're mercenaries. All right. So if we're mercenaries, Agatha, in an upcoming D&D game we're playing, you're a druid, right? If we're mercenaries and you're a druid, how does your druid character fit into this agreed upon party concept?
Oh, I'm not a druid, actually.
Oh, did you change it?
Yeah, I think someone else. Yeah, someone else.
What are you playing now?
Offered to take. Well, I'm playing a fighter because I was like, spells are too intimidating.
That's okay. So, like, for instance, if you're a fighter, what is your role in this mercenary company? Are you the muscle? Are you the master of weapons? And
I am the heavy, yes.
Yeah, you're the heavy. So that's how we start to tell this story together. And so, for instance, if I'm like the wizard in this mercenary group. How do I fit into this? And so it kind of puts everyone together right at the beginning. In Coriolis, it takes it even further, and it's like the group concept affects your group mechanically, giving you access to certain talents. So, for instance, my group, they actually went with the explorer concept, because they were like, we kind of don't want to do as much combat, and we want to explore a lot. And so this group concept seemed like something that would work for us. And I was like, okay, that's great. So let's think more about it. What do they want to do? And they are like, okay, let's be correspondents. So in Coriolis, they have all these sub-concepts, and they pick correspondence. And so our entire group ended up being podcasters in space. They ended up being podcasters in space, and they come from different backgrounds, and each of them has their own show, right? And each of them has their own show, and their ship is basically their station. And so they designed this like ship, and on their first mission, they're like, okay, our ship is really great for being this podcasting exploration ship, but it doesn't suit our needs for what we're currently doing right now. And we're being put into this scenario that we want to report on, but we're ill-equipped for. So I thought it was really interesting. But I like the idea of sitting down with your group and talking about what you want everyone to be. And that's like, how do you all come together? So I really like that. The second thing that I really like about Coriolis is how you get experience. So I'm going to scroll through the PDF. It'll take some time to load. But in Coriolis, experience isn't gained by I was just scrolling. Isn't gained by killing shit. It really also isn't gained by like following the main story. Just like flags, experience is gained by like role playing and paying attention to one another, which I think is something that isn't called out a lot in RPGs. Paying attention to what your other players do. Because sometimes when we get, when we're in a game, we're like, okay, it's combat, I'll wait until it's my turn. And then you just kind of don't pay attention. Or it's like, oh, somebody has a spotlight, I'll wait until it's my turn to have the spotlight. And I won't pay attention to what they're doing. But in Coriolis, at the end of every session, you actually have to answer 6 questions. And every time you say yes, you get an XP. So the first question is, did you participate? You get an XP for attending. Second one is, did you overcome a difficult challenge to help your crew reach its current goal? Did you have difficulties, right? And did you work to get past it? Really like that. Third one is, did you put yourself or your crew at risk because of your personal problem? So when you create your character, basically you can get all the stats done in like 5 minutes. The part you have to think about is when you create a character, you have a personal problem that is yours. Then you have to have relationships. And one of the character relationships you have is your PC buddy, your closest relationship in the crew. So you get XP if your personal problem puts everyone at risk. It could be like, hey, I have an alcohol problem and I wasn't my clearest when it mattered. Or my problem could be like, look, I'm really curious and I'm seeking something and I thought this thing would lead me closer to my own personal goal. But the fact that I let my curiosity put us in danger might be a liability. You get XP for that. Next one is, did you learn something new about yourself or another PC? So this encourages you to reveal more about your character and think about how your character would evolve. It also makes you actually actively listen to other characters and what they do, what they say. Then, of course, did you sacrifice or risk something for your PC buddy? Did you put yourself in danger or give something up for another person at the table? And the last one is not as important, but did you act in accordance with your icon, which is your deity in this game? But the first 5, I think, are really interesting to use in any TTRPG. And it's kind of what we've done for Level Up Gaming, the program that I run virtually now here in Toronto. And for those of you who are tuning in on on YouTube or right now live, myself and a couple of other friends, we run an organization called Level Up Gaming, and we basically provide adults who are on the autism spectrum or have other disabilities with opportunities to develop their social skills in any way that they'd like through tabletop role-playing games and board games. Board games are kind of on hiatus because of COVID, but we've been running like 4 8-week programs a year remotely now. And we do experience this way through Coriolis, even though we're playing D&D. Because it encourages people to role play and kind of explore their characters and share with one another. So I really, really like this ruling. And aside from the art, it's actually what got me hooked on Coriolis. And was the emphasis on role playing. But yeah, that's my my other one that I like to add. The idea of coming up with a group concept or a party concept, and the idea of handing out experience and advances based on role play. But again, I really like that it's structured in a game and it's told to the players.
Yeah, that's cool. That really actually that reminds me of Blaze in the Dark or Forge in the Dark games. They basically, when you said the choosing like an initial concept, that is a thing that you do in Blaze. So I do think that's a great idea. I think yeah, in Blaze in the Dark, you choose like a crew type to determine, first of all, your kind of your backstory, but also what kind of games you want to do. Because Blaze in the Dark is like, whoa, criminals in this like fantasy steampunkish place. But you know, what kind of criminal? That's the question. So that's what you determine in the beginning when you choose your crew type. Doesn't mean that you can't do other crimes, other scores, but you can be like, we're mainly smugglers, or we're mainly enforcers, like beat people up. So that I do think is a great idea, because it really helps, again, everyone at the table, kind of all the players to come together and then immediately feel invested in this crew that they're supposed to be a part of. So I do like that. And it seems like all of Forge in the Dark games have that I've read so far, and I really enjoy it. And also in the kind of like end of session questions that have to do with roleplay, I've seen that in quite a few games. Like Dungeon World has it, where it's like do we and then Monster of the Week has it at the end of it, where one of them is, do we solve a mystery? And it's more like did we as a group do things? Which I feel like I'd like the Coriolis one more as a like system agnostic thing to adapt, because I really like the like, did I cause trouble for the party or the group based on like my character trait? Because I feel like that is a very like, that encourages role playing, not just for yourself, but also in how you interact with other players. So I really like that aspect of it. And in Blaze in the Dark, they also have that, like they have playbook specific XP triggers. For example, the Cutters is address a challenge with violence or coercion. So if you, at the end of the session, if you have done it, then you like mark an XP and stuff. So I do think that this is a pretty good tool in general. So I guess this is more like not necessarily like a GM tool, but more like a game design tool.
It's a game design tool, like the spirit of a game, and it's, you know, reward your players for role playing.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes things like this it also helps players who are used to, again, broadly generalizing, like more trad type of gaming, for them to have permission to role play. Because like sometimes people are like, they don't want to be the first person, like when the GM or DM is like, okay, now we're going to do like role playing stuff. You don't want to be the first person that's like really getting into it when everyone else is still like farting about and cracking jokes and not doing it, like not actually role playing. But then if there's like a reason, it's like, okay, but I'm doing it for the XP, then you're kind of
breaks the ice.
Yeah, like there's an external motivator that that this kind of style of gaming already encourages, right? Like you're there for the XP. This will get you XP. So therefore, it's of course fine if I'm doing all these things to get that XP. So I feel like sometimes this is helpful in that specific way, in that in that way of giving yourself permission to do it and to justify yourself, which sometimes that's what people need, and that's fine. And it's good.
I'm not role playing. I'm just trying to get my XP point.
Yeah.
Or XP, experience point.
And I'm to bring this around, because we're talking about like for other tabletop RPGs, but D&D is like a big one, the big one. And I think this type of rule D&D is missing sorely, but it tries so hard to convince you that it doesn't miss it. And what I mean is that D&D gives you experience for killing stuff. And then it says, kind of like almost as a side note, you can also get experience for other challenges. And what it tries to do there is try to bridge over the gap of saying, oh, if you have a difficult social encounter, or you do these things, these very specific things you've laid out in these other systems, your DM should probably give you some experience for that. But here it's very clear. It's like, no. If you do this one thing, and yeah, there's still wiggle room, but if you do this one thing that causes tension, or this thing that like gets into your backstory or whatnot, you get that tick, you get that value out of it. Whereas D&D is kind of like your DM will decide whether or not that was actually role playing, and like that has never sat right with me.
Yeah, because you are the one who answers, and you give yourself experience in Coriolis.
Yeah.
Now there's a minor challenge in incorporating this into D&D, and I think that's what we should also talk about, because people will be curious. In D&D, when you level up, and if you level up ahead of another person at your table, there is a stark difference between what your characters are now capable of. In Coriolis, when you level up, another character could have leveled up like 3 times, and I might not have leveled up, and we are still just as capable.
Yeah, okay.
In D&D, it's a little bit different. So what you could do is you could have milestones, right? Because, they always talk about milestones. And this is something that we tried on Level Up Gaming, and it was, we used a private survey that we sent to everybody after each session, and they would go through these, and then we would get the results. What we did was, on one end, myself and the occupational therapist that I run the group with, we basically said, okay, the group needs to get this many points to level up collectively. So it wasn't like in Coriolis, if you get 5 points, you level up. It was, okay, as a group, we need to get 20 points total to level up. So even if somebody's having like a bad day, right? And maybe they don't want to participate and they just want to enjoy the story, they don't feel pressured into role-playing to level up alongside everybody else when everybody is contributing to that level up. So if you are to use this in D&D, that's what I would recommend, right? Everybody interacts with the story differently, and you don't want to exclude everyone. But you also kind of want to introduce, you want people to feel like they're role-playing, like Agatha, like you said, they're role-playing for something, because there are people who think like that. And if you took like an arbitrary amount of XP and made that a goal for each milestone, it could be a fixed number as well. You could say, okay,
that's cool,
25 points. And if you have a 5-person party, and every session you could get 5 points, after every session you could get a level up, right?
So what's funny is that when you talked about this, and like, this is my first experience for this kind of mechanic, the way I would have incorporated to my D&D game is actually part of like the after session debrief.
Yeah, that's what
which would have been. Oh, perfect. So it would have been not for experience, but actually would have been part of the roses and roses and wishes situation. And all I would have done is on the screen, I would have put some of these questions with no context whatsoever, just like questions to help you read and just like go through. And now we'll do roses and thorns and wishes and things like that. And just the questions themselves, I think, bring immense value to a table. I think that's great.
This game is very explicit that this is done in a debrief. It actually says how much you learned during the game is measured in experience points. You get your XP after each session. Have a debriefing, because this is translated from Swedish. Have a debriefing and let everyone discuss what happened. So it's not just
Love
answering
it.
these questions, it's talking, right? For each of these questions you answer yes, you get 1 XP. And now here's a part that you may or may not disagree with. The GM will have the last say on how many XP each PC gets. But let everyone speak their mind. Mark your XP in the checkboxes on your character sheet. After XP have been handed out, you're free to change relationships with other PCs. So you can say like, hey, in this debrief, we had our thing. Maybe our characters aren't buddies anymore. Maybe we'll come back to being buddies. Maybe I'm buddies with this person. So next session, your roleplay will be different because you aren't forcing yourself to risk something for a character who in the story might not be your buddy anymore. But yeah, Coriolis is very explicit about its debrief session.
Nice.
Okay, what's the next one?
Oh, I was actually just gonna add in, like, I really like that. I love that, like, arbitrary number that you pick, because I'm just thinking about it for myself, and I'm like, yeah, I would be into that if I was a player. That everyone's like, okay, how many points do we have? I also think, just like in this case, because I didn't realize that about D&D, that's good to know, because I think then something like, I'm gonna talk about Dungeon World again. Not necessarily supporting some of the or one of the co-creators, but their end of session questions I don't think are the best in terms of like encouraging role playing, but I do think that in the spirit of that, it's more like, so I'm just going to read them out. One of them is, did we learn something new and important about the world? Like, explain its importance. Did we overcome a notable monster or enemy? Explain its notability. And did we loot a memorable treasure? Explain its memorability. It's like, it's very like on theme in terms of like hack and slash, loot. But
Dungeon World.
So I would change, if your goal is to like encourage role playing, then I would change it to be like, okay, did I play into my character concept or something that with more specific wording. But I feel like, we can say, did we do that? Because then if one person in the group has done it, then you can count it. And then so it's like everyone leveling together as opposed to like individuals.
Yeah, this is a group. You'll find these questions in all of the Year Zero games. So Tales from the Loop has these questions, a modified version as well. I actually think the Tales from the Loop one's really interesting because one of the questions is about how you interact with your parents. Because in the game you play as kids.
I love that.
And the GM plays as like your parents. I think Tales from the Loop is great. I actually had an idea that I was talking about with some members of our Discord server. I'm mentioning the server a lot today about using Tales from the Loop and Lancer of all things. And I had this idea that your kids in the 80s, arcades are really popular, and a bunch of kids are disappearing in your town. And all the disappearances would be kind of centered around this arcade and one game in the arcade called Lancer.
Love
and
that.
it would be a game where you would play one session in Tales from the Loop where you're exploring all these things, and the other session, like in Tron, you get sent into the game and you're playing Lancer.
It reminds me of this idea I had where you'd play Monster Hearts, but after school was over, you'd go to someone's basement and play Dungeons and Dragons as your Monster Hearts character.
Yeah. you know there's I don't have
how cute, like it's so like meta, but just like it's great.
So there's a comic series called Young at Heart, but Young as in Young Street, Yonge, Young at Heart, and it's an anthology of comics written and illustrated by Toronto. It's like Unbreakable for comics in Toronto.
Yeah.
And one of them is actually about these like goblins, and they playing D&D set in Toronto, and the TTC is this dungeon, and it's just so cute.
Oh man.
I mean, true story.
Pretty much, yeah.
You know what? I wonder if we could play a Tales from the Loop game set around this arcade, and maybe the arcade in a sort of like Scud in Control, that one side mission where you play an arcade game. Did you ever play that in Control, Steve, when you played the game?
I love Control, and yes, those arcades I played them a lot.
Yeah, right. So like, what if it was like Tales from the Loop, and there was this arcade, and the arcade was actually over this sort of, I don't know, like this threshold. We'll use Control terms. and every arcade machine that was affected was a different game. And maybe in order to like save your friend, you have to beat all of the games at the arcade.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute. Also, I really want to play Tales from the Loop. I just really want to try the Year Zero system in general.
I think you'd really love it.
I think I would too.
I think what's also cool is that you can't die in Tales from the Loop.
Right.
Yeah. And you have like, instead of a ship, you have like a hideout. For like, you're like, and when we played it with Level Up, the crew was like, okay, our hideout is at a junkyard. And do you remember, did y'all watch Arthur?
I love Arthur.
Okay, so
Arthur.
remember in one episode of Arthur when DW, they find out that DW's, that, what's her name? One of the characters, their dad, Francine's dad was the garbage man.
Yep.
And they found out that like the junkyard was actually this like really cool place.
Yep.
In the players, they were like, okay, we want exactly that. They want the junkyard to be where their hangout is, and one of their parents is actually like the keeper, the groundskeeper. And one of our participants was really into laundry machines, of all things, and was like, okay, so they've taken all these old laundry machines and stacked them up and formed this castle. And all of our game sessions started off at the junkyard near these laundry machines. And they would have different laundry machines where they would store things in. It was really cute.
That's so cute.
Yeah, and
I love that.
And we did this whole adventure where the dinosaurs were actually attacking people in town. And so they were trying to figure it out. And they actually, I set it in port credit. And they were like, we need to learn more about this, and they discovered this thing and they captured one. They're like, we need to know about it. Our school is going on a trip to Toronto to go to the Royal Ontario Museum. And they actually went and they found a curator of the ROM, and they did this whole adventure at the museum where they tried to sneak a dinosaur onto a school bus. Yeah,
that's it was so cute.
Yeah, we should play Tales from the Loop. I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh man,
I'll gladly run it. But yeah, let's keep going. We got half hour left. Agatha, do you have anything else that you want to add?
I do, but why don't we go to Steve? Because I already talked about a lot of.
Okay, Steve, what do you want to add?
Steve.
I think I'm gonna have time for just one more. So one thing that I stolen from other games to port into my D&D 5e game is stuff from D&D 4th edition, and I steal stuff from 4th edition all the time. And I know 4e has a bad rap, and people are like, "Oh, it was a bad game," blah blah blah. But to be honest, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. And if you just blanket statement say 4E is bad, you can eat my butt.
I pulled up the goblin for you, Steve, by the way.
I'm spicy about that.
Scandalous.
I'm spicy. I'm spicy about 4th edition. But I really, really liked it. It wasn't perfect. I like 5e more. But 4th edition, basically whenever I need a monster idea, I always go back to 4th edition and just look through it, and I always find something that is like super rich, and I wish it was in 5th edition, and generally it's not. But Daniel, I think you brought up Goblin, right?
Yeah, you said bring something up, and you were like Goblin, so I brought up the Goblin in the 14th
so
monster manual.
There's so much other stuff that is like in the monster manual, but Goblin, from a very tactical point of view, I think has this one ability that is just fantastic. It is both narratively very interesting and tactically very interesting. And it's their shift ability, which basically says, I think it's like when they attack or when they get attacked, or if they make an attack, something like that. It changes between the different goblins. But basically, as a reaction, they swap places with another goblin, which I think is just really, really interesting and very simple and elegant. But the idea is that goblins are just a nuisance to deal with. There's other stuff to unpack with that. But from a game perspective, when you see one goblin, it's not that big of a deal. 2 of them, not that big of a deal. 4 gets to be a problem. 8 is a nightmare, and anything greater than 8, you're kind of in trouble now, because what they're going to do is continuously like shell game themselves around, and it's going to be really hard to keep track of which ones you're trying to take out first. And what they're trying to do is basically overwhelming with their numbers. And what they've done with this shift tactic is just made it so the GM can just really go ham on this and just make the players' lives kind of a nightmare. There are other ways to, of course, deal with it, but if your resources are low and you don't have the necessary means to kind of go through this tactically and deal with high numbers of enemies, goblins will definitely overwhelm you more than just rolling die. They're overwhelming you based on something that is built into their stat block. There's a billion other ideas in just the first monster manual in 4th edition, but this is the one that always comes out, and this is the one that I talk about the most when people ask me why 4th edition is worth going back to. It just has cool stuff like this.
Yeah, especially if you're like, I know that there are folks who kind of got into D&D with 5th edition and they really love combat. 5th edition doesn't have really rich combat, but 4th edition does. It's super tactical. So if you're really into that stuff, 4th edition.
I literally went back to 4th edition like earlier this week because I was playing another world building game, A Quiet Year, and they had built out this idea for a dungeon. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Start flipping through the monster manual, and I just found something, and I just went with it. Spoilers, it was the Sorrow Sworn, which are just Steve going again for like a half kind of second. D&D generally has spirits and monsters that are like brought out of vengeance and anger and fury. Sorrow Sworn are spirits who are wrought out of tragedy and sadness, and they are just as powerful and dangerous as those wrought out of fury and revenge, which I thought actually was narratively very compelling. So Sorrow Sworn is just an energy of such extreme sadness that it can't help but drag others into its abyss. Very sad.
To kind of go with this 4th edition one, I kind of want to like break the cycle. I'm actually going to share something with you two in the Zoom chat. And it's a game, and this is actually not it's not a, I think this one is actually just like a tool that I like to use in D&D when I play in person, and it's the index card RPG.
Oh.
So the index card RPG, I'll share it in our Twitch chat as well, is a game by Runehammer Games. I've been following him for a while. He actually used to have, he changed his YouTube channel name, but it used to be called Drunkens and Dragons, and he used to just get drunk and talk about D&D. And he's like a fantastic illustrator, and created a series, like there's a whole game around it, but he created these supplements, and they are literally index card sized illustrations. And I purchased it on DriveThruRPG. I went to a printing shop and I got them all printed out on like thick cardstock, and I cut them all out by hand. But what you end up having are these really cool index card scenes. So what I would do is when I would play D&D in person, I would actually take the index cards and lay them out. So for instance, there's an index card for a well. I would stick it down on the table. There's an index card for like a cottage, and I would lay them down and build out a scene. So instead of having like this, like, you know, roads and stuff, I would just have index cards where players can explore, or index cards with portraits of NPCs people can talk to. So I would prompt my players to do is place their minis down on the index card where they want to have their scene.
Yeah.
And it's just like a really cool way of having a really, really obvious visual reminder of what you can interact with. And it's a great way of really quickly laying out important pieces in a town. So if you have a map that you've drawn on, and you know you don't want to have to like say, okay, you're here, and put them down on this big printed map, you can say, hey, here's the handout of the map, but here, these are the key locations, card, and you can just organize it that way. So yeah, just you mentioned 4th edition, and I wanted to kind of talk about minis and that. So index card RPG, very much highly recommended. Also, just Runehammer Games. Go to their YouTube channel. It's a great channel.
Agatha, I know you wanted to give it a break, but like, sorry, I was gonna give the ball back to you, but if you have other things.
No.
Agatha, do you have something?
Oh, yes. Oh no, I thought you wanted to hop in with something. I got confused.
No, I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to gush about the index card RPG.
I was like, you gave me the ball. Daniel gushed, but Agatha, back to you because I want to. Agatha, what do you got? What do you got? What do you got?
You, Agatha.
Okay, so actually, you talking about index card RPG just reminded me of a thing that I find very useful, again, for running games that where maps are really a good way for people to start for people to navigate the world. So like again, in a lot of like, for example, like D&D, like high fantasy games, or even just other games like what is that? What is it called? Legacy: Life Among the Ruins.
Mhm.
I love that game.
That's a Jason
it's
Morningstar,
really
right?
is it? I don't really remember actually. I don't think so actually, but
Oh wait,
I
no,
don't actually
different
remember.
game, different thing, different game.
Okay,
I'm thinking of
yeah.
Durance.
Oh no, this one is the one where it's like you all play a character and a faction, and then you build the world together and also try to achieve the goals of your own faction. That game is so good if you love like that kind of like, it feels like a board game almost, but it's also a role-playing game. So it's so good. Anyway, sorry. If you want maps, like, and you as a GM are literal garbage at drawing maps like me, and you're not like, oh, I was staying up last night and I just drew this beautiful map like Daniel, then I think what a great, like a really good idea is also when you using index cards, and then every time you go to a new location, especially if it's kind of like prompted by player generation. So if you're like, oh, like, what do you know about Sleepy Hollow, you know, or something like that, and then you can ask the player to draw on the index card, and then that way if the map, you didn't start with like a fully formed land, you can just keep adding onto it, and then people will have an idea of like where they're situated in relation to each other. So it's like, okay, this place is north of the pond of revenge, you know, like you can keep putting it and expanding it, and it's also very easy to carry around, so you could always just like whoosh, smoosh it back into one deck of index cards. So I find that an amazing GM tool in general, to if maps are a fun part of your game.
I like that question you asked, like, what do you know about this place? I
Yeah.
love it when GMs kind of take some of that load off themselves and then, you know, ask players questions. There's a game called, again, we're out of turn. It's my fault. There's a game called Fellowship, and it's something that I really like, because, again, Fellowship has a rule that I know many people use in their D&D games, but it is a structured part of the game. So, you know, there is a lot of baggage with the way that the ancestries or races have been written in D&D, because they have this long history that they're all connected to, right? And what if you're going into a game of D&D, the biggest one, and then, well, you have a player who doesn't know anything about D&D, or you have one person who knows a lot about D&D, right? How do you kind of even the playing field? So what's interesting is that in Fellowship, every player plays as they're not just a hero. They are, in the game, a champion of their people. Okay? They're a champion of their people. Now, if you make your character, if you make a PC a champion of their people, the game explicitly says that they know every truth about their people. So if you were like, I am the elf champion, they are the authority on all things elves in your session of Fellowship. So to translate this to D&D, say you have a party with different ancestries, or there are like two elves or whatever. Say like, okay, Steve and Agatha. Steve, you're playing you're the elf. Well, tell me, what are the elf customs around this thing? Or like Agatha, you're playing as the Goliath. Do Goliaths like this kind of food? Is this a part of your cuisine from your homeland? Or are you accustomed to it here? And the players become the authority on their ancestries. So they get to drive the story. Or if you have multiple players who are like multiple elves, you'd be like, okay, let's hear it. But I like that Fellowship has that codified.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these things are general best practices, but it's really nice to have them codified. I completely agree about that. One thing that I did want to talk about, it's not, I guess, as universal, is I really like the Monster of the Week mystery worksheets. I just really like that whole section in the GM section. So they basically walk you through like how to create a mystery for your Monster of the Week, and then they have things. They have sections that are descriptors on locations, monsters, and also key players or key characters. Sorry, and each of them you would choose like a motivation and an effect. And those two things are very closely tied. And I just find that way of conceptualizing this kind of story very useful. Like it really vibes with me to think about it that way. Like, okay, what is, okay, so this place is a house. What is its motivation? Its motivation is to entrap the people inside, right? Like, so then now that I know this, I just, every single time I want to add a consequence to someone's like mixed result roll or failed roll, then I remember that this is the location, and it's just like an easy way to guide me when I'm GMing. So I've used it for other the same kind of stories, same kind of games that don't use the Monster of the Week system, but it's still like a very easy way for me to do that. And also I feel like this way of coming up with like threats is the same in Apocalypse World as well. So depending on what kind of story you want to adapt it into, I feel like this is just like thinking about it conceptually is very useful for me.
I like that. I'm kind of, my head is kind of like swimming with ideas right now.
I know. I feel like the 2 hours that we have is great because it gives me just enough to fill my brain to capacity without too much overflow. Because whenever I have these conversations, I walk away with so much, and just like it helps me in my personal games, but also gives me a bunch of stuff to read, you know, later on. And then, you know, it just feeds back in this great, beautiful, pleasurable loop.
Yeah, it's just, I think what I love most about these streams is like, not only do we have just like basically we have a regular hangout,
yeah,
but
pretty much,
right? But also like, you know, we get to share our knowledge with each other and everyone else, right? Like I hope people go out and, you know, everyone goes and buys a copy of Mahar's game and then uses those questions to kind of form relationships with other characters, right? Almost like you could even go and take that Coriolis idea of the party concept and relationships and problems that your characters might have, and then take Mahar's game, Falling, and then use the questions within Mahar's game to frame your relationships with other characters in your party. You could use the XP system from Coriolis to get XP, but have all of that informed by the questions that you did with Falling and the group concept that you have. So it's almost like you've taken 2 games there and put them into 1 game and made them better. Right? It made 5th edition D&D better using an indie game and a trad game.
I was just thinking that, you know, my D&D games today really are like 25% D&D, 75% like other games at this point. And like, I'm not mad about that. In fact, I think my games really, really benefit from it. And I will never knock D&D for just being big and having space. I think it is what it is. And I would never knock anyone who loves D&D because I love D&D. But there's just so much more out there that can just enrich the overall experience of playing an RPG. And I hope these conversations really kind of help people understand that, you know, it doesn't need to be this big investment into another RPG where you have to learn a new system and like buy a new game and things like that. Sometimes it just takes dropping $4, or if you can't afford it, asking for a community copy or getting that community copy, because a lot of indie RPG creators will offer that, as well as a lot of folks. Daniel, I'm sure you have bought RPGs where you just contribute to the community pool as well, because you understand the value of this kind of stuff. and just it can really, really enhance and really broaden horizons here and just really enrich your experiences. I love
I
these
mean, like
conversations.
half of my physical TTRPG bookshelf are games that like I probably won't play, but I bought because I like the rules in it, or like I see as like inspiration, right? Just take what was that like Bruce Lee said? You know, take what's good from everything else and make it your own. That's what this is about. This is the Bruce Lee TTRPG. Right?
Any stream we have that ends with a Bruce Lee reference is a good stream. A+, S tier stream.
I think it's right. Okay, so I just looked it up. The Bruce Lee quote, I was right. It's absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is essentially your own. Right, and that's Bruce Lee's way of life. Right.
Yeah.
Learning, and refining your game. And you say a good thing about D&D. You're like, I play 25% or 75% D&D or whatever. The thing is, like, D&D wasn't written to be a universal experience for everyone.
No, never.
And it will never be. Right? And so I think as long as we embrace the spirit of making your game yours and not, hating on people for doing that, I think it's a great thing. And you're right. I think if you're out there and you just play D&D, good for you. I think it's great. If you just play D&D and you're like, oh, I really like this goblin idea that Steve talked about from 4th edition, use it in 5th edition. Or like you like this flags idea, use it in your D&D game, right? I think for me, it's like we as a community, indie creators, writers, editors, cultural consultants, fans, we thrive when more people are introduced to our hobby. So I think that's why things like Critical Role are really great, because they are introducing people to this hobby. And people watch Critical Role and they go and they buy their first D&D book and they set up a game. And let's see where they go from there.
I'll also add that the addition to like other games in your D&D game is great, but there's also no real risk, because if you add something and you decide later to take it away, it doesn't cost your group really anything. And that experience of like adding things in, experimenting, and then taking it away is also a source of a lot of joy, at least for my groups. And there have been times where I'm like, hey, D&D group, we're going to try something new. I hope you're please be patient with me. I'm going to be as patient as I possibly can, and we're going to try this new thing. And if it doesn't work out, we're going to throw it in the garbage and never look back. And usually that works out really, really well. And there have been times where we've like done things and it's like, Steve, some feedback. The feedback is this thing that you did wasn't that great. Fine. And I understand and I appreciate the honesty here. And then we move on. And we just get better. The game gets better for that. Always.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, as long as we're open with one another and, we share our feelings. That said, I think this is the perfect opportunity to close this stream. Right? We've covered things that we love and ways you can incorporate them into whatever game you love. And so, if you do that, if you take any of the lessons that you learn from this, this podcast, and you incorporate them into your game and they work out for you or they don't work out for you, or if you have something that you really love, a rule, a tool, a piece of text that you think everyone should see, let us know. You hit us up on social media at AZNSRepresent. Our personal social media handles are on the screen. I want to know what you folks use. If you are a member of our Discord server, or you would like to be a member of our Discord server and join in on the conversation about that, hit up one of us on social media, on Twitter, send us a DM, and we'll shoot you an invite. Thank you so much, folks, for tuning in. What we're going to do